Hey everyone, I've been caring for other people's gardens for probably more than 30 years now, and I have to make a confession. I haven't been. I feel like a little bit of a hypocrite because there are few things that irritate me more than hearing about someone going to a doctor for a cold or maybe they've got a little bit of flu and the doctor goes and prescribes antibiotics. And I've read enough and listened to enough doctors to know that they feel this pressure to give antibiotics because that's what their patients expect. They know that even though the cold or the flu is viral and antibiotics have absolutely no effect on viruses and will actually cause their patients harm in the long term, they still go ahead and prescribe antibiotics. And they do it because that's what's expected of them. And if they don't, the client or the patient will probably just go somewhere else. That really irritates me. They have a responsibility to educate their client as much as to look after them. And actually they are looking after them by educating them. And as I said, for more than 30 years, I've been looking after people's gardens. I've been planting their trees, cutting their grass, pruning their shrubs, weeding their flower beds. And I think we do and have done a great job. I smugly do my best to push back on the use of herbicides and insecticides, and I almost never use either of them because of the damage they do to the entire ecosystem. And I feel good about at least trying to convince people out of their use of chemicals. And I'm even exploring solutions to move over from petrol and diesel-based equipment to alternatives. Except that I'm just like those doctors that irritate me. One of the things that's expected of us when people get home from work after a long day, the first thing they expect to see is a well-manicured lawn. And while I think there are better things to plant than a lawn, they have their uses. They are beautiful. I love a beautiful lawn, and I'm not against them. But second on our clients' priority list is that in every flower bed, wherever there's empty soil, they expect to see the soil freshly turned over and cultivated. Apart from spraying chemicals everywhere, this is by far and away the worst thing that you can do to the long-term health of your garden. And the thing is, I never push back on my clients on this. I've never spent any time trying to educate them. I just give them what they want without thinking about the long-term consequences. I want to make sure that I keep them happy, just like those doctors. So here goes. If you are one of my clients, or if no one has ever taught you how bad turning the soil is, then I'm really sorry. But now that you are here, I can't stress how vitally important this is. There's an old gardening saying that says, feed your soil, not your plants. And the point of this is that we tend to focus on our plants because that's what's obviously important to us. But our plants have this intricate and intimate and interesting relationship with the soil that's not even fully understood. Science is only just beginning to catch up to the ancient wisdom on this. We tend to think of soil as dead placeholders for inert nutrients and chemicals, when the reality is so much further from the truth. Soil is made up of two parts. It's this incredibly complex combination of tiny bits of stone, the building blocks, and this diverse ecosystem of bacteria and fungi and large organisms like worms and other tiny creatures. All of these tiny creatures are responsible for taking the raw elements in the sand and the clay and the organic matter that's actually out of reach of the plant and putting it into a form that plants can use to grow. If we don't look after these creatures, we slowly but surely starve our plants. And the amazing thing is that plants have a symbiotic relationship with these creatures because they create sugars and send them down to their roots to feed mainly the bacteria and the fungi, which in turn are food for other organisms, which then create these complex compounds which plant roots can then absorb and use to grow. And if we leave the soil bare, exposed to the sun and the wind, the heat ends up killing off these organisms in the soil, which in turn begins to starve whatever plants are there. And then when we actually turn the soil, we are actually taking these little creatures and bringing them to the surface to kill them off. We're essentially destroying all the life in the soil to a deeper level, all the while thinking that we're looking after our gardens. So what can we do about this? How can we reverse this process? Well, there are three things you can do about it, and I kind of think of like sunscreen. It has an SPF, a sun protective factor, but in our case, SPF stands for stop, protect, and feed. The first step is to stop turning the soil. We need to stop destroying the fragile ecosystem in our soils. Part of this is that we need to also stop removing all the leaves in the garden. These add food to the garden, which brings me to the second step, which is protect. Protect your soil. Add mulch. Mulch is basically using leaves and organic matter to create a protective layer on top of the soil, almost like the outer layer of our skin that protects the sensitive layers below. Mulch actually protects the soil from drying out. It keeps all those little creatures safe. And the third step is feed. And this is done in two ways. So you need to add organic matter, and mulch is part of that process because it slowly breaks down, adding the much needed nutrients back into the soil. And you should also add as much natural pesticide-free organic compost as you possibly can. And then the second part of that is to plant plants. Plants create a layer above the soil that helps protect the soil from drying out from exposure to sun and wind. They drop leaves, which forms mulch again and feeds the soil. But more importantly, they use photosynthesis to create the sugars which feed the bacteria and the fungi in the soil. I mean, this is just a very basic overview of something that's incredibly complex. And at some point, I'll do a video going into a bit more detail as to what soil actually is. It's really incredibly interesting. There's nothing dry about it, pun intended. I'm also going to do a video on the importance of compost and how you can make your own compost. So that's my confession. I'm going to stop being a hypocrite, and I'm going to start making some positive steps. So if you've gotten to this point in the video and something about this made sense to you, then how about joining me on this journey? Let's turn the tide on our soils. Let's leave them better than when we inherited them. I promise you won't be disappointed. In the meantime, happy gardening.